instead of just using emotion, like, trust me, people want this. It's like having this balance of emotion and vision and then reality. Like,
Mhm.
we need to get there to make this all worth it. Otherwise, we should go do something else.
Thanks so much, Ryan, for joining me on How to Pivot. I am so glad that you are here.
Thanks, Aaron.
Welcome.
I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to this.
I know, me too. I was so excited. And sometimes because you and I don't know each other well, we're meeting right now, I wanted to hit record as soon as possible because I find that's the most authentic way, to have such a good conversation. I can just ask you questions that
Oh, it's so true. Like, there's so many times on my show, I'm like, wait. Like, I want to hit record
right?
before say that again.
Exactly. Like, I don't want to hear any good stuff. I just want to hit record so everyone can hear it, firsthand. So, first of all, there's so much that I want to dive into. And I know so much of your experience and what you do now stems from when you had your family business and eventually sold it. So, I want to start there. Can you give me and our listeners just a little bit of background on like what happened, how you started the company with your family and exited?
Sure, absolutely. And my dad started it, so I was too young to start the business at that point. I remember every stepping stone along the way, but I'll kind of give you the cliff note version. Sharon, is that so? My dad started the family business back in the early '90s. Mortgaged our house, bought a couple $100,000 of used Panasonic copiers, and didn't look back. Literally burned the ships behind him. And over the course of the next 10 years, he scaled it up to we hit 21 million in revenue, 115 employees, 3 locations. And I worked in another business like my whole life. I mean, I remember moving stuff around when there was 3 employees to, and like, moving copiers around to code call them when I was in high school, and swore in my grave, like most family business, second gen probably, that I was like, I'm never going to go work for him. Well, financial crisis hits, and what happened was there was kind of like a bunch of things at the same time where he had been my dad had been very distant from the company for about 5-6 years, went through a bunch of personal stuff and business. If you're a privately held business owner, business and personal all intertwined. So he had stepped back, and then the financial crisis hit. I joined full time, and we had lost a lot of money that year. Just like everybody else had different issues that happened in '09, the margins of the equipment just dropped out of the bottom. Like, so like the margins of the equipment that was kind of the fuel to keep the thing going disappeared. So what happened was, in that I got pulled in, Sharon, after I was selling for the first like 7 months or something like that of '09, got pulled into a bank and CPA meeting and was like, holy crap, like what now? Over the next 6 years, it was pretty much a complete turnaround. So, like, we had replaced about 60% of the employees, but I'd fired like 50 some people by the time I was probably 25. And then new accounting and ERP systems, sold 2 branches for cash, built out the managed IT and software automation, and rebranded, because the whole goal is like we wanted to be the B2B tech players that we were competing against. By the time we got to that point, I was essentially the executive vice president running the executive staff and the company. My dad was kind of in the visionary role, if you want to call it that. We had this constant conversation of, he's like, I'm selling, selling, not selling, selling, not selling, selling, not selling. It's a proverbial Groundhog's Day conversation every week. And I was like, like, what are we going to do here? And essentially, now I can articulate, but we had one stream of cash flow. He wanted to keep taking money out because he'd been doing it for 18 years. I wanted to keep reinvesting for growth, keep turning things around. And at this point, we were cranking along, but we didn't have any alignments. We're talking to bankers and CPA firms, and we were in Vistage and our CEO peer group, to wealth managers, to investment bankers. Everybody would sit down with us and be like, that, like, I would like hear someone like talk about a good strategy. I'm like, that sounds awesome. We get out of the meeting, I'm like, what the heck are we supposed to do with that? Like, great tax strategy. Let's go sell more copiers and IT services. And just, it
Right,
was like
right.
revenue, gross profit, checking account, revenue, gross profit, checking account. And that's how we just kept running the business. We felt so trapped, and we kept having that conversation. Finally, Sharon, my dad was like, I gotta be done.
Mhm.
So we pinned up the company against a handful of competitors, sold the company in 2014. We can unpack this if you want, but essentially there was 2 offers. One was double the value, but that required gutting the company. So that's the one we ended up taking because of the purchase price. Got my dad to retire. I got some money out of it. I had to go back to the office and bring in the 90 people and then let them know. And then we had to fire about 60 people. It was
Wow.
it was a horribly emotional day. Paid a lot of taxes, paid a lot of debt, and I went, "What the hell was that?" So,
Right,
like,
right.
since that day, it was like this whole, like, excursion and journey I've been on of trying to figure out what we went through, and then how to help others essentially take more control over the future destiny of their company.
Right, and I'm sure, I look back too from my recruiting firm, we were just talking how I've had it for 20 years, and so there's been ups and downs, and I think as a business owner too, because I remember 2009, like, I sat there and, like, thought, "Okay, what's gonna happen?
What
Am
now?
I gonna be able to
Yeah, right?
keep my staff and keep my lights on?" And that was a pivotal, we'll talk more, of course, about, like, how you do pivot as a business owner, but I know I remember that specifically, that time frame when you joined your dad and just totally probably had to restructure and rebuild,
Out
and
of
you
pure
get to
grit,
that.
like, just
Yeah, yeah,
it's literally we were going, like, Thursday payroll, 240 grand, Thursday night, get the wire across. Like, it was every 2 weeks
yeah.
is like, that was the those were the goal lines at that point in time.
Right, and sometimes when you're starting from that point and you do start to see traction and progress, it's exhilarating and you're moving back up. But then there comes that point, I think, too, and I don't know if your dad and you talked about this, but then there's that fear that goes, "Okay, what if there's another downturn? What if,
Mhm.
and I can't sell it
What
right now."
if, like, 1,000 things, right?
Yeah,
And as you
yes.
get older, your risk tolerance and your ability to deal with the emotional drainingness or the drain of just constantly having to pivot, and so, like, I think
Right.
as you get older, you have less energy naturally because why would you wanna keep going through that? But then also, you know, well deserved. I mean, like I think about even other partnership buyouts that I've been through since then. You have different ages, different risk tolerance, and you start wanting to reap your rewards of taking cash flow out instead of reinvesting. So there's this timeline and risk tolerance, all these things that kind of like get swirled into one
Right.
big situation.
Yeah. So it sounds like it bubbled up and you were able to exit at a good point. But I know that doing it that way and having to walk into your team and kind of deconstruct
Mhm.
everything, like tell me a little bit more because I know that's kind of like for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's their baby. And so having to do that, I'm sure really like set the tone for everything that you're doing now.
The stomach ache that you probably have right now and the listeners probably have is
Yeah.
exactly the stomach ache that I had for that day. And then I went in and I called everybody in because, like, at that point, like with the new people that I had hired, I mean, think about just to replace the 50 some people, like we didn't have a one-to-one success rate. I mean, probably I heard like
I know about
75
all
or
that.
80.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. We would have definitely kept you in business for quite a while. But they had come there for the vision that I was building. And like, it was kind of this idea of what this business could be kind of got transitioned over to me as I was kind of, mapping the strategies forward. It was so hard, Sharon. It was like it was felt like honestly, I felt like I betrayed everybody. And like, the
Mhm.
worst part is, and this is a lot to do with what I do now, is like the typical employee doesn't know, and most business owners don't know how to value a company and how equity value goes and works. So, like, why would you expect a frontline manager that's a technician? Like,
Mhm.
so they know we do 20 million in revenue. So you know what everybody says? Well, the Tansoms walked away with $40 million and fired everybody. And it's like that is so
Right,
far from the
right.
truth. It's ridiculous. So it was
Yeah.
betrayal and then like how people perceive it because of the lack of education and why everything happened and what actually was the result makes it even harder when you're like everything that we worked for just kind of got dismantled. It's not the buyer's fault. They bought a customer base and some employees, and that's kind of
Mhm.
this whole thing about being aware of what you want and how to tie what you want into, your long-term goals. But the stomach ache was real for sure.
Yeah. So how did that transition into your current company? Because I'm sure a lot happened between that day and then building a company that actually helps businesses clarify and get really clear ahead of time of what they want their business to look like.
I don't know about you when you started, you were telling, I mean, I know it's, you've talked about it and about your origin story. I want to be an entrepreneur because I like, and I continue to take the risk because I like to have a lot of fun. I want to create wealth and in a proportion to the value that I'm creating in the world. And then I want to make an impact. And the vehicle of a business is the most amazing ways to like have personal growth, wealth growth, and then have the ability to make an impact and then control your time or the people that you interact with to a certain degree. And so like all that control that I want, which is, and I think a lot of other people are very similar. I'm willing to take ridiculous risks to keep that situation going. Otherwise, I could go make a bunch of money, hiding in the corporate, belly of something, big corporation. And no, thank you. So what
Mhm.
happened was that control and the desire for personal growth and personal realization, you all of a sudden during that whole process, I was not in control. So the Super Bowl of your entrepreneurial career, I realized like I'm just like a pawn in this entire game that I am not aware of how it works, who the players are, what are the rules, what are the scoreboards, and or what's the scoreboard and the scorecard. And so like, which really is how do valuations work? How do you grow value? How do you structure the deals? Not to sell necessarily today, but like you own a business, it's an asset. You want an asset to grow in value, you want to monetize it in a way that makes sense for you when and how you want under your control. And so like that, when you say like, why am I doing what I'm doing now? I realized I was so out of control at the very end. And then I realized a lot of other people are like that too. And I wanted to go in and not just be a consultant that sucks off of the cash flow of another, owner or something like that. Cause I, I know what it's like being on the other side of that. I wanted to teach people how to fish and be like, all right, like kind of like standing on a mountaintop, like you would know, no idea what happened, which is honestly the origin of the podcast. It was like, what the hell was that? And like, why does no one know
Mm,
how to structure all this stuff and like sit people down and be like, hey, Sharon, what do you want? Like, truly, like, what
right.
do you want? And then how do we map a path to go get there instead of just blindly guessing that we're and hoping that we're gonna eventually get what we want?
Right. So is that how your podcast, because I know you mentioned that it started from that, like wanting
Mhm.
to share your story and make sure that you can educate other people so it doesn't start.
It
Yeah.
was 100%. So, like, it was one is, what the heck was that? And all I could figure out, like, after doing some Google searching is, like, there's nothing out there. It's like, oh, like, hey, some law firm has an 800-word blog about evaluation, or some CPA firm from a CPA who's never ran a business also wrote a 500-word blog that means nothing to me, who is an entrepreneur with no finance background. So, like, all I found was this disparate information all over the place. And then I
Mhm.
was like, huh, and then I started hearing, like, about the podcasting world, and this is back in 2014 and 15, and I was like, "Wait a second, people usually just say yes to be on your show, and I just get to talk to awesome, smart people for free?" And that was it. So that was criteria number 1, Sharon, and the second one was when we sold, I was 27. And so I looked like a freaking child. And then like people didn't believe my experience. So I was like, well, hey, maybe if I interview really smart people by default, people will know that like just because I'm young, I actually know a couple things.
That's amazing. So it's intentional growth. Is that the name of the
Mhm.
podcast? And there's like how many downloads? 400,000.
430,000 or something like that.
That
Yeah.
is crazy. Kudos to you for doing that and being
I appreciate that.
consistent.
It's fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
like I was just saying to you,
amazing.
like you're gonna enjoy this. It's fun because you get to just be yourself and ask questions and people get to be along your intellectual journey with you.
Totally. That's why I'm kind of selfishly doing it so that I get to learn and talk to amazing people like you. So, yeah. So with Arkana, tell me a little bit more about that. Like what do you focus on now as a company?
So, do you wanna go through a couple of the pivots that got me to Arkona? Because there
I
was
would love
definitely
that. Yeah.
it's definitely not a straight line journey. So, after we sold, I was like, "What the heck was that?" I lasted 60 days at the buyer's company because I'm what I now understand is professionally unemployable. And so, like, being an employee is not really in my DNA, and so I had, like, honestly, like, no plan. I just walked into the CFO, Neil Lee's office, who's a wonderful human being, and I was like, "I think I'm done." And he's like, "What?" And so I was like, "Yeah, it's not my name on the building, and I don't think I can handle this, even though you're a great, a great company." So I actually, when I bailed, I went in and I actually partnered up with this guy doing wealth management. So, like, I didn't know anything about money. Like, and it's so funny because this is all I'm in is finance now, but like, as I was revenue, gross profit checking account for the business and like just keep selling. Like that was our deal. But went in, got my wealth management, Series 65, helped this gentleman build up his firm, which was supposed to be our firm. A lot of challenges, didn't sign an operating agreement and a partnership agreement that I wish I would have. So ended up helping build his firm when it got into some disagreements and didn't have the documentation. And what ended up happening was, was about 18 months. And I realized, Sharon, that it was not my gig anyways. What was kind of the what part of the pivot was, okay, we had this company, which I really understand operations and strategy and growth of a company, culture, leadership, whatever, to run a business. There's this whole thing called compound interest and money and cash flow that assets have. Wait a second, it's the same thing. Like a company has cash flow, private equity actually acknowledges this and buys and grows and sells companies. So that's really where like my worlds intersected. And then I started consulting for probably about like, I think it was like 3 or 4 years, just kind of freelancing. And that was where the 5 principles that we have for intentional growth started to become, yeah, they started surfacing up. Created these 5 principles, which at this point now we have a training. So Arkona was 2018, I think. 5 principles. We have a training program for entrepreneurs and we teach people how to view and run their company like a financial asset. So teach them about valuations, value growth, exits, deal structures, strategy, finance, and then they can take that information and then, plug it into the EOS model or VTO or whatever operating system they're using. And then we can talk about how we built out the fractional CFO service if you want. But like every step of the way, it was just like, listen to the market, get the crap kicked out of me as I'm having conversations with people, synthesize what the feedback is that I'm getting, model it out, and then trying to make sure that pricing and product fit works. So there's the whole kind of like passion and vision of why I'm doing it, and then trying to actually make sure that it's a viable business. They're kind of like two things that have to be done hand in hand.
Right. So how did you first get that out into the world? Did you start with like a small group that you were, testing those
Good
fundamentals? Like
question.
how did it all come together?
So wonderful question. So when I met my business partner, the other founder of Arkona, his name is Pat Hobby, and we met at a training in 2018. And then that was where I had already had like this probably about 30 documents that were like kind of the infancy of the 5 principles. We stopped. Well, so we partnered together, and then we like put a pause on both. We essentially formed the company, and for 6 months built out the curriculum. And then like during that time, I was doing the podcast.
Mhm.
So it was like a combination of the podcast, my old network. And then in October of 2019, we had a beta test. So we actually got like 15 entrepreneurs that I knew. And I was like, hey, can you give me 2 days? I'm going to give you the first beta test of the training. And we took all their feedback. And then we had our first paid one in November of 2019.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so good to find people that can give you good constructive
Real feedback.
feedback.
Like, hey,
And
Ryan, you suck. You're talking too
no, but like,
fast.
is this valuable? Yeah, because you don't know when you're creating it, and putting it out for the first time. So that's amazing. Because I know as an entrepreneur, and I know we were talking about this before we hit record, I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs that you get, like Michael Gerber said in his E-Myth book, you kind of get that seizure, like, okay, I have this idea. I'm just
100%.
going to like jump in. I'll kind of figure it all out as I go. I think one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs is having that clarity and that vision ahead of time, when you first set out. So how do you, and because it's so important. And we talk about, you want to start your business with the end, if you can, right? And work your way
Yeah.
back. Like I've heard that over and over from different people and coaches. But that's really difficult when you're first starting out and it's just an idea. Like, how
Hmm.
do you, like, what advice can you give to entrepreneurs that are in like that, even that baby stage, or, even for me, like it changes, everything changes all the time. So the way that
Hmm.
my business looks now looks totally different than it did in the beginning. So
Hmm.
how do you get number one, I guess my question is, how do you get that clarity from the beginning if you can? And then secondly, how do you keep adjusting? Because that vision's going to change as your business changes.
Hmm. Wonderful question. We could be here for like three
Yeah.
days.
Can you just stay
And
on for
no,
a
no, no, no. Yeah,
couple
yeah, yeah.
weeks
No,
and
but I think it's a great question. And so I'll give you my personal experience story first, and then I'll talk about how, because that's part of our training, but like
yeah.
did it the wrong way, and then incorporated my lessons learned into our training. And then now even with our current business, we just are going through that exact exercise you're talking about. So we're even
Yeah.
pivoting and I'm modifying our business model as we speak. So what not to do?
I'm
So,
taking notes, Ryan.
yeah, I did not
I've
do
already
any of
probably,
it.
yeah.
I
It's
didn't
gonna,
I didn't ha didn't have a clear vision, didn't know what I wanted. So after we sold, I then was like chasing the idea of like, I want to build a business that I would have wished I would have been able to work with. So like turning around a $20 million business when you have an infrastructure and you want to then take that and grow it, way different than starting a business. I'm never starting a business again. Let's just put it that way. I'm going to buy one and I'm going to buy cash flow using other people's money and debt or my own. And like, that's a whole different thing. So for the first 5 years, Sharon, I mean, like literally burned through all my cash, like $500,000. And it was like, okay, like just trying stuff out and
Yeah.
didn't have a framework. So like what happened was I was so bullheaded on my idea that I financially got into a position where it was like, I'm just burning through cash trying to like do this thing. And I'm like, I didn't, it's this whole, like Mark Cuban's got this one phrase he said, like, he never wants to educate a market. Like, yeah, that's what I was trying to do on like value growth and like how to like, I mean, so like it's 10 years later. And so like the market's finally catching up because I'm so stubborn. I'm still here, but like burned through hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to figure it out. Then when I met my partner, Pat, it was like the 2.0 version. It's like, okay, like there's something here. And I'm not, because like my mind at this point now is like when we figure this out, the dividends for decades to come are going to be huge. So that's always been my thesis, but it was the idea first led by passion and emotion because of my experience. Again, talk about an engineer or the, E-Myth, the entrepreneurial seizure from the plumber, or a marketer who then goes off and becomes a freelancer. That's that seizure you're talking about. Like, it's so important to have your clear vision of what you want for the company and your financial target. So that's actually principle 1 and 2 of our intentional growth principles. So now I'm going to talk about with Arkona, how we have incorporated the discipline that we now teach. So over the last 4 years, it's been, I mean, we went from physical boot camps, COVID hits, I digitized it in 6 weeks, and then we were off and running. So in 2020, we went from doing 15 people per boot camp for $5,000 to then like this digital version for $2,000. And we've had 400 people go through it in 30 months.
Wow.
So it was
So
like this pivot for the digital.
yeah.
And then the people that were coming through because of the high volume were saying, hey, we want financial help. Like we need CFO services. They weren't saying that, but it was like
Mhm.
they were looking to our modules on finance and how we were teaching value growth. And they're like, we've never seen how you guys organize it before. Like, that's so cool. So the market was like, we had like 20 some people like, we'll pay you if you help us. So I was like, oh, I think we should probably do this. And so launched we had a couple iterations of the fractional CFO services. And then that's been growing like gangbusters, but now we have to have other product offerings that are higher margin because we have very expensive CFOs that are helping people, but to scale services is hard, which I'm sure you're very aware of.
Mhm.
So we need other offerings between the training. We have a software dashboard we're launching. And I'm only explaining this all is this wouldn't have been obvious to us if I did not have a clear equity valuation personally that I wanted at a point in time. So in 2030, I have an equity target that I want my company and my shares of the company to be worth. I have a clear target of my salary, the distributions, and how to get there. So I'm essentially having my constraint saying target equity value, target timeline. How am I going to fund that growth to get there? How does that impact my distributions, my salaries, and my taxes? So we were off track recently. So within the last 4 months, it's like, all right, I see that target moving further away. What are we going to do about that? Then we have to get back to the drawing board during our quarterly strategic planning sessions and saying, okay, product services, what are we hearing from the market? How are they telling us? Like, what are we going to do differently? Is there a way to scale a different offering that can get us an entry point? And so instead of just using emotion, like, trust me, people want this. It's like having this balance of emotion and vision and then reality. Like,
Mhm.
we need to get there to make this all worth it. Otherwise, we should go do something else.
Right. So really having, because I think as entrepreneurs, like we were talking about, they have that passion for either their product or their service, and they maybe organically grow, but they forget to have that financial goal at the end, like you're talking about. And then that's really, it's tangible. You could see it. You can know if you're on track. And I think as easy as it sounds easy, I think a lot of people get lost in that day to day fires with clients, marketing issues, whatever, and they lose sight or they don't even have that Like if we did a poll, I would say very few entrepreneurs and small business owners probably even have that goal at all if you ask them. Would you say that's
Th
on track?
that's very true, and I'll expand on that, Sharon. So,
Yeah.
like, I got either my wife or my 2 daughters' hair on my head. It's like the
Aw.
long women hair all over my house. So anyways, I digress. So when I do these presentations and workshops that are not paid ones, so all the ones that we're doing out in front of everybody else, like, well, what's your goal? People don't like, see, here's what I hear all the time. What's your goal? 20 million. Okay. I want to go from 10 million to 20 million or 25 million to 50 million or 1 million to 5 million. I don't care what it is. It's always a revenue target and employee count. And I look
Mhm.
at you and I go, who cares?
Right.
Why? And people will go, they just kind of look at me this blank stare, Sharon, like, what do you mean why? I'm like, seriously, why? I had a $20 million business that lost money. Who cares about the revenue? And people just kind of look at me and I'm like, no. The only thing that matters is what is it worth?
Mhm.
Truly, like, what's it worth to yourself and to anybody else, the equity value, just like the equity in your house, and it's quantifiable. You can know it without selling it, but so people don't have that goal, an equity goal. It's a revenue arbitrary vanity metric BS, and it's like, no, flip the narrative and say, what's the value need to be, my equity value? If people actually understood equity valuations, then they might go, "Ooh, now I actually can see how that's obtainable." And because they don't know these things, then they go to revenue. And then what they do is they solve, and they, meaning me and my dad, I did it for 15 years, is like, you solve for annual cash flow because you don't understand valuation growth. So what happens is, because you're like, hey, look, at the end of this year, what we're going to do is we're going to take as much salary, distributions, perks out of the company as possible without suffocating the growth,
Yeah.
because we don't know how to reinvest. So if you have $1 million in cash flow in Minnesota, you pay your 350 grand in taxes, you got 650 left. Say, okay, let's say I'm going to reinvest 500 grand. To what and
Right.
why? If you're going to have less money this year, the goal is to have a return. But if you don't know how you're going to get that return, you're just truly guessing. So it's this whole framework, going back to your point, long-term goal framework allows people to make decisions that have, like, everybody's got to be pivoting and having different decisions every day. But what is the framework to make the decisions based on the trade-offs in front of you?
Mhm. So, for anyone that's listening, our listeners on the podcast, what would be a really good, like, first thing that they need to do after they listen to this podcast? Because, like we said, I mean, most people probably are not doing that. They don't have that goal. So, they listen to this podcast, they go on with their day. Like, what's the first thing that they need to actually do or think about
There's three
next?
things.
Okay.
3 things. So, one is, what is the equity value that you want your business to be worth at a point in time? Take 2025 or 2030, depending on your timeline. So, what do you want the equity value to be worth? Essentially, you're part of your net worth. Is it a million, 500 grand? Is it 5, 10, 50, 20 million? I don't care. What is the equity valuation? Number one. Number two is, what is the income that you want while you're on the way there? And the income is 2 components. It's your income, your salary, which is your job, and then distributions that comes from the equity. So equity value target at a point in time. Second one is income through salaries and distributions. And the third thing is, what do you want your leadership role, your W-2 paycheck? What role do you want in the organization along the way? And it can evolve. It could go from, like, doer, salesperson, marketing, ops, whatever it is, to, like, hey, in 2 years, I want to have these people and I want to move more into thought leadership, or I want to move more into the chairperson, or, the board member, whatever. Like, so it's the role along the way. So equity target at a point in time, income through salaries and distributions along the way. And then what's the role and how do you want it to evolve along the way? Just think about it. Like,
Right.
that's it. You don't have to know the answers. So to your point is, like, just doing what you said for the listeners. Think about it. You're
Right.
gonna be you're gonna be in, like, the 10% of the people that actually know. What is the stat? Gallup said, like, 17% of Americans have goals and 1% of them write them down.
Mhm.
So
And
you're
one of
gonna
them actually,
immediately be in the
yeah,
1%.
absolutely. Yeah, we tend to do that at the beginning of the year. We make our resolutions
Right.
and goals, and And then by October, it's like, what was that? What was I trying to accomplish? So with your business, you need to do that the same way, but have that. I mean, those three things that you just mentioned, I mean, that's huge, whether you're just starting out or, everything that happens in the marketplace, the pandemic, you constantly have to evolve and change, but that's some good stuff, Ryan.
Well,
Thank you.
and and if you think, yeah, you bet. And like by the way, this is all learned the hard way. So like take it for what it's worth. You don't the nature of advice is you don't have to take it. But what's interesting, Sharon, is I like decision making frameworks. Cause like it's there's a lot coming at us all the time. And if you think about those three things I just mentioned, let's say I'm talking to you and all of a sudden you got a key executive that's a rock star, right? And I'm like, oh my God, I gotta have this person. How do people make these decisions? The amount of times I hear, we should just give up equity to get to hire this rock star. And it's like,
Mhm,
okay, no, let's just pause and say, okay, how does that impact your salary and your distributions in the near term
mhm.
and the equity target? So if you wanted a $10 million equity valued company in 2030, and this person's going to now have 25%, you need the company equity value total to be bigger. Otherwise, don't
Right.
do it.
Mhm.
It's truly an investment. So you better you're going to be burning some cash and then there's going to be a return. So you should have more income and then a higher equity value. Otherwise, don't do it. It gives you context or it's going to help you with the role progression that you're talking to. But there's a framework to say trade-offs. How does this impact my role? How does this impact my income? And how does this impact the future value?
Right, and also thinking more long term, because if you're looking at it for a shorter amount of time or even that year, it's harder to make that decision when you have to put and invest, a certain amount to get a key executive and
Well, and most people don't
onboard
know.
and ramp up.
Right, and if you don't know, if you're giving up equity and you don't increase if that doesn't increase the long-term target, people do that stuff and then they wake up after 8 years of being burnt out, like, "Okay, now is the time." It's like, "Well, sorry, Sharon, you're half the value that you need to be
Right.
financially free, so now what are you gonna do? You're gonna
Mhm.
grind for another 4 or 5 years?" I mean, so instead of just putting your head in the sand like an ostrich and then waking up and hoping it's sunny out, yeah, again, it goes back to my control, we have a lot of crazy stuff going on, but at least engineer the highest probability outcome that you're gonna get what you want.
Right. Yeah. What else? Is there any other things that you would suggest for someone who is either, just starting out or midstream, like with the pandemic, for example, a lot of businesses have had to shift, their goals are changing. Like you said, I mean, you had to take everything online digitally in a very short amount of time. So, how do people, when they're going through that transition, what do they do to relook at their target and know, okay, I need to change. This needs to change, or what I'm doing needs to change to match the target. Is there one that needs to happen first?
I would say it all starts with the framework that I mentioned, those
Hmm.
goals of the role, income, and future target equity.
Yeah.
And then it's typical strategic planning saying, are we talking to the right clients in the right marketplaces with the right product and service with the right margins? Because revenue, gross profit, then all eventually boil down to normalized EBITDA, which is cash flow. And there's a multiple tied to that. So you better well stay focused on right products and services to the right customers at the right margin. So it all generates the cash flow you need to create a valuable company. And when you have to pivot and think about that, you have to really say, okay, well, are these things working or not? And you need data to say, hey, the margins on this offering are decreasing or they're gone because of the pandemic. Or, I
Right.
mean, right now, talk about pivoting. We got energy issues probably over the next 12 months because of the war in Ukraine. We got, labor supply chain issues. We got inflation. The amount of stuff we're dealing with all are going to be mandatory pivots or different decisions for everybody. And unless you have the data that says right customers, right margins, how does that all result in cash flow for the future value of my company? If you
Hmm.
can't quantify all that, then I don't know how people pivot. You know what I mean? I don't know how you
Right.
could pivot and just, you can just guess, but then
Right.
you just hope in 24 months everything's fine. It's just,
Right.
and I've done that. It's not very fun. So my point is knowing, it's kind of like a scale when you're at the gym. You can't lie with the numbers. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like you can avoid stepping on it. You can avoid looking at your numbers, but you're going to eventually have to deal with it.
Right. That's so true. Where can people find you and reach out to you and tell us a little bit more about, because I think you said now everything, is it all digital or are you still doing live boot camps?
Back to in person. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Nice.
We Arkona.io, ARKONA.io. There's all
I'll put it
320
all.
podcasts. Yeah,
Okay.
all the videos
I'll
up
put
there.
it
You can,
all in there.
yeah, my calendar links out there. If people wanted to chat or anything like that. And then yeah, there's all the training stuff about the virtual offerings, and then we're back to in person. And you'll get a kick out of this. I had a buddy that was listening to our show, and I've been saying physical boot camp instead of virtual, Sharon. And he was like, I have this picture of people like talking about strategic planning and finance with kettlebells.
Oh
I'm
my
like,
gosh, that is so
nope, it's an
funny.
in-person boot camp. So yeah, there's all those details around the website.
Okay, good. Well, I know we could talk forever, so I might have to have you back on, but this was so helpful. I hope that the listeners will take your advice, really stop and think today and put some plans and goals, on their calendar and then reach out to you if they need more help. So,
Aaron,
thank
thank you
you
so much for having me on.
so
And
much
yeah,
for
thanks
this
for
was
doing what you're doing.
great. Absolutely. All right, we'll talk soon and thanks for being on How to Pivot.